Today, I'm going to teach you how to make the classic Au5 Razor bass, but for free using Vital. This is the bass in a lot of my songs between 2011 to 2018. That lasery, metallic, fluttering kind of bass. Now, I used Razor, and you will need Razor for this. However, you can use Razor for free. I think there is a 30-minute demo that you can trial. Razor is a plugin in Native Instruments Reactor, and you can use the free Reactor player to use Razor. The Razor demo is all we'll need because we'll just be taking out and extracting wavetables from the Razor synth to then put in the free synth Vital. Vital is an amazing wavetable synth that has spectral capabilities unlike any other wavetable synth. And the fact that it's free makes this entire process require no money. I'm going to load up Razor. This is the sound that I recreated. And I'll show you how to just make this from scratch. So I'm going to initialize Razor. I'm going to turn off the low pass. So we just have a saw wave. The comb peak filter. So if I enable this, we get notches in the frequency spectrum, modulate the phase position with LFO1, and then turn the modulation amount up to 50. Set the LFO1 shape to a down saw, and then set it to beat mode. So now it makes this kind of effect. If you turn the cutoff all the way up and the stretch all the way up, we get this really broad kind of bandpass filter effect, where it's like a wave just sweeping down from the highs to the lows. The random knob here is the random phase for all the partials. If you turn that all the way up, you get this fuzzy effect. I'm also going to enable single trigger so that these notes are legato and they glide. I could also turn up the glide too. So it kind of bends down to the lower octave. The key to this sound is the Formant oscillator. This is something that is unique to Razor and is not possible in something like Harmor, where you do have a comb peak filter, such as the phaser, but you don't have these Formant tables. Now, the Formant oscillator is 32 different Formant tables, kind of like wavetables, and then you have the Formant control here, which allows you to transpose them. So for instance, I could select different Formant tables and then transpose them with the Formant control. Already, you're starting to get that kind of sound. So in the case of the Seahorse VIP, I used Formant 21. Right now, it doesn't really sound like it. We got to do a few other things. First, I'm going to turn the color up to around 2 or 3. This is the spectral tilt. It's just going to make the top end a bit brighter. Then I'm going to enable safe bass, and this is going to allow a clean sub to come through without any filtering. I'm going to turn the slope down, so we get mostly just a sine wave sub. Next, modulate the Formant transposition with envelope 2, and I'm going to reverse the modulation. So it will go from down to up. I'm going to increase the decay time a little bit. Now I can modulate the speed control. Already getting that sound. Another thing that I like to do is enable spectral clip, and then turn the slope down. This kind of helps tame the top end, the harsh resonant frequencies. And then enable stereo spread, and this alternates the even and odd harmonics left and right, and then alternates them according to these cycles. So you get this really nice stereo spread effect. Turn the ramp down. That's pretty much the effect. Now I can choose different Formant selector. I could try different ones to get different effects like that. I could adjust the LFO speed. Another unique thing that Razor has is the dissonance effects. Something that I often used was the stiff string. And what this does is it emulates when the string has a wider radius, it starts to bend the overtones in the treble more than the lower overtones. It starts to make them sharper, and you start to get this metallic glassy effect. And something that I would like to do is basically put an envelope on this. To get these types of effects. Also, because this is inharmonically stretching the partials, I can turn the random phase down and get a natural dispersion from the string filter, as opposed to the more sol wave-like sound. Another thing that I will do is use the sync dissonance oscillator. And this creates an inharmonic kind of comb effect. I'll do the same thing. Modulate this with envelope 2 and have it rise up. And now if I combine this with the Formant, turn the color up a bit, you get all sorts of different like metallic textures and timbres. So I want to make this into a wavetable so that I can use InVital and recreate this without the need to use Razor. I'm going to initialize this again and just extend out one note. I'm going to use, in this example, C0. In order to truly make a perfect wavetable, you have to use the pitch at the same frequency as the window size of each frame. Basically what that means is you have to pitch it down to where each wave cycle is 2048 samples long. I'm not going to demonstrate how to do this in this tutorial, but for ease of use and speed, I'm just going to use C0. It's a low enough note so that the top end is not getting really like cut off or low pass sounding. Anyway, so we have a saw wave, bypass this low pass filter. I'm not going to use the comb peak filter because Vital has something that emulates the comb peak filter. All I'm going to do is just use the Formant oscillator. And in this case, let's use Formant 21. Now what I can do is map the Formant control to an automation and then create a ramp up like so. We don't need to use the entire full range, so maybe something like this. Next, I'm going to right click and hit bounce to new track. And this basically turns it into a format that we can import straight into Vital. I'm going to open up a new Vital. And it's as simple as just dragging this into Vital's oscillator. I am going to use pitch splice. If this does not import, you can right click, hit crop clip, and hit pitch splice again. And if we open up the wavetable editor with this little pencil icon and drag the playhead, we should be able to see that this waveform is pretty coherent. If it's really noisy or something, then the window size is off. Because we recorded this or flattened this at C0, I'm going to type in C1 because the octave is shifted, and this will adjust the window size to match the wave cycle of the pitch that we imported it as, in case it didn't import properly. Next thing I'm going to do is enable spectral phaser, and if I play a note and move this frame around, we can hear that this is the same as Razor's Formant control, because that is what we automated. Now, I'm going to make this louder. So real quick, the tweak I'm going to do is go into the wavetable editor, hit add modifier. I'm going to use wave folder. This is a saturator, but if I increase the multiply just a little bit, we can get the waveform a lot louder. Now this phaser, I'm going to turn this all the way down to 0. And then if we hit this pencil icon, we can go into the phaser shape, the spectral phase. So what I'm going to do now is assign an LFO1 to this parameter down here. This is the spectral phase. And I'm going to just bring the LFO amount all the way to 100% and then make this a ramp up. I'm going to set this to tempo mode and make sure the smooth is all the way down. And now this is just going to be a rolling phaser, just like in the comb peak filter in Razor. Next, I'm going to use envelope 2 to modulate the frame position amount. And I'm going to put the sustain down and increase the decay. I want to inversely modulate this, so it goes from low to high. We're already starting to get that sound. Next thing I want to do, in order to essentially key track this to keep it Formant preserved, is use the note modulator and put that on the frame position as well. And then I'm going to set that to around between -100 to -200. This will essentially keep it Formant locked. Next, I'm going to enable oscillator 2 and use this as my dedicated sub. I'm going to go into factory, basic shapes. We can use a sine wave, and then I like to use a little bit of bend, or actually squeeze, to just kind of make this into a soft saw wave. This is essentially emulating the safe bass in Razor. You're getting a little bit more harmonics. Then I'm going to use LFO2 to modulate the level of the sub. And I'm going to set this to tempo as well, and set it to the same tempo as LFO1. So we're already starting to get there. I want to make sure that this is in phase tempo-wise. I'm going to just draw a note here. So you can hear it's not quite in tempo. It sounds a little early, and we can adjust that by just moving this spectral phase around. Right there sounds good. And for the sub, we can adjust the LFO phase for LFO2 and get a better aligned sub that way. That sounds good to me. So there are a couple other things that I want to do. Remember when I increased the random knob in Razor, it gave it that kind of fuzzy sound? Right now, the phases are not randomized, but you can do that by going into the wavetable editor, clicking on the audio file source first keyframe, and then setting the phase style to vocode. This will randomize the phases, and you get this sound. Now it has that soft fuzziness. Another thing I might want to do is set with LFO2 to spline mode, as well as the phaser envelope to spline mode too. You could adjust this to taste, get more narrow peaks, or make them asymmetrical. However you'd like, but I like to keep it faithful to the original Razor sound. Right now it's still in mono and it's pretty dark, so I'm going to enable the multiband compressor. I'm also going to just double click on all these low bands so it doesn't have any upward compression. Turn the mix down a little bit. And for stereo, we could do a couple things. Typically, I used reverb, very short Valhalla room reverb. I'm just going to set the time down all the way and the size down, chorus amount down. We can get something like this. Kind of that nice roomy sound. Okay, so I'm going to switch back to modulating some things. Right now, the LFOs need to be modulated in, the LFO tempo needs to be modulated. So I'm going to use macro 1 and just put that on the tempo. I'm going to right click and then hit make bipolar. I'm going to do the same thing for LFO 2. Right click, hit make bipolar. Now, we have an increased range. Another thing that we can do is click on the phase warp mode, set this to, let's do squeeze, and then set a stereo modulator to this, and then just bring this down maybe to like 0.1%. I'm gonna right click it, hit make bipolar. What this does is it slightly phase modulates or bends the wavetable in the left and right channel in opposite directions. This simulates something that I used to use a lot in Logic. Logic had a great phase distortion plugin that I could use the sub of the signal to essentially phase modulate the left and right channels in opposing directions. And you get this really wide kind of bubbly sound if you increase it. Get that really thick, wide sound. I like adding just a little bit of that to this. And then lastly, for the effects, I'm going to enable an EQ, add some high shelving, some gentle slope high shelf, just to make this brighter. Now, another thing that we can do is export another wavetable of the sync dissonance effect. So I'm just going to switch this to sync dissonance. I can render this out, bounce the new track, drop this into the other oscillator. Let's use pitch splice and match spectral phaser. Envelope 2 to the frame. I'm just approximating what I did up here, but we can adjust that later if we need to. We can get that metallic sound back into here. You could also use squeeze with stereo. Get this cool sound. This inharmonic stretch is actually something you can achieve with just Vital. If I set this to basic shapes and then go to inharmonic stretch, and let me set this to just a saw wave, we can get a very similar sound. It does not extend as high, but it's very similar to that. And we can essentially resample this instead of having to use Razor a second time, just by putting an LFO on it and then just have a slow ramp up. We could essentially record that out and then import it into a new wavetable. Next thing I want to do is make this monophonic with legato. So I'm going to set the voices to 1. Let's make the pitch bend range 12, and then enable legato, and then increase some glide time. So now we can do things like this with the pitch wheel. And I'm going to modulate the macro 1 and the pitch wheel. So now I can automate this stuff. We have the rate and the pitch. And then the last thing I want to do is modulate the frame position with the note modulator for the sync dissonance table. And then also let's set this phase style to vocode as well to just make it really smooth. Very cool. So I went ahead and rendered out all 32 Formant tables from Razor with maximum frame and frequency resolution, no frame interpolation or downsampling, only to realize that distributing raw audio from Native Instruments plugins is against their end user license agreement. So you have to either extract them yourself or find another source to acquire them, unfortunately. However, this vital preset, without the Razor Formant tables, is available on my Patreon as a template that you can use with any wavetables that you'd like. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.